There is a house in California where nothing quite makes sense. Staircases rise with purpose, only to stop at a ceiling. Doors open into walls. Hallways turn sharply, then fold back on themselves. For nearly 40 years, this house was never finished, and maybe it was never meant to be. Some places remember what we tried to forget. Some stories refuse to die. This is Into the Unknown, where I explore haunted history, real-life monsters, conspiracies, and the unexplained. Are you ready to step into the darkness? I'm your host, Diggs, and if you're intrigued by the unexplained, the paranormal, and the strange and unusual, subscribe and step into the unknown. Tonight on Into the Unknown, we step inside the Winchester Mystery House and into the life of the woman who built it, Sarah Winchester. Sarah Winchester was not a recluse. She was not uneducated, and she was not, by most historical accounts, insane. She was intelligent, well-read, musically gifted, and married to William Wirt Winchester, the heir to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, a company whose firearms, particularly the Model 1873 rifle, became some of the most widely used and deadly guns of their time. But Sarah's life was marked by loss. Her infant daughter died young. Years later, her husband followed. Almost overnight, Sarah inherited a fortune, roughly $20 million at the time, along with a daily income equivalent to thousands of dollars per day today. She was unimaginably wealthy and completely alone. Legend has it that Sarah believed she was being haunted by the spirits of those killed by Winchester rifles, especially the Model 1873. According to the story, these spirits were restless, angry, and malevolent. And to survive, Sarah had to build. To confuse the ghosts, she designed a house that was intentionally mystifying. Fake staircases, doors to nowhere, sharp turns, and hairpin bends. Architecture with no logic except misdirection. Some staircases climbed upward, only to slam into a ceiling, as if the house itself is trying to lose whoever follows. When Sarah purchased the home in 1885, it was relatively modest, just 8 bedrooms. Over time, that number grew to more than 40. It was said she slept in a different bedroom every night, a strategy, some claim, meant to ensure the spirits could never find her in the same place twice. Sarah was also heavily influenced by Eastern cultures, and many of the sleeping chambers reflected that fascination. Furnishings inspired by distant lands filled rooms like the so-called Oriental bedroom, spaces meant to feel far removed from California, and perhaps far removed from whatever haunted her. In places, the house fell into disrepair, but expanding it was anything but simple. What Sarah Winchester undertook was a Herculean task. Construction crews reportedly worked day and night, year after year, hammering, sawing, building, then rebuilding. It's claimed that she spent more than $5.5 million over 40 years. In today's money, that's well over $100 million. And yet, when Sarah Winchester died in 1922, the house she devoted her life to was valued at just $135,000, roughly $2.5 million today. Damaged by earthquakes, structurally strange, impossible to modernize. To potential investors, it wasn't a marvel, it was a sinkhole. In 1906, a massive earthquake ripped through California, tearing apart large sections of the house and reducing it to just 4 stories. Afterward, Sarah nearly abandoned the front wing entirely. Some sources claim she believed the destruction was a message from the spirits, a warning that the endless expansion had gone too far. Rooms were boarded up, hallways sealed, entire sections left unfinished. Attics were frozen in time, scattered with unused building materials, as if the workers had simply stepped away and never returned. The house didn't just stop growing, it went quiet. The highest point in the house is the Witch's Cap Tower, rising from the south turret. Many who've entered describe it as carrying a heavy, almost oppressive spiritual presence. Getting there is part of the experience. The passageway is narrow, claustrophobic, ceilings barely 5 feet high, forcing visitors to hunch forward as if the house itself is pressing down on them. The room is sparsely furnished, sound echoes unnaturally, every footstep lingers longer than it should. Of all the rooms in the Winchester mansion, many consider this one the most unsettling. There is no written proof that Sarah Winchester believed she was haunted. No journals, no letters, no first-hand confirmation of seances or spirit warnings. Much of the legend emerges later when the house became an attraction. So what's really happening? Some believe she was building for the dead. Others believe she was building to cope. Grief has a way of demanding movement, purpose, noise. As long as something was being built, something wasn't ending. Maybe the house wasn't meant to trap spirits. Maybe it was meant to trap time. The Winchester Mystery House still stands, unfinished, unsettling, asking questions it refuses to answer. Was it built for ghosts? For guilt? Or for survival? Because sometimes the most haunted places aren't filled with spirits. They're filled with grief that never found a way out. All right, before we go any further, I want you to do something for me. Pull up a chair. Seriously, pull one up. This isn't a lecture. This isn't a history lesson. This is a roundtable discussion. Just you, me, and a house that refuses to explain itself. Tonight, I don't want you to just listen. I want you to think with me. The Winchester Mystery House has been called haunted. It's been called cursed. It's been called the result of madness, guilt, and unchecked wealth. But strip away the tour guides, strip away the legends, and what you're left with is a woman who never stopped building. So here's the question I want sitting at the center of this table. Why? Let's start with the story everyone knows, that Sarah Winchester believes she was haunted by the spirits of the people killed by the Winchester rifles, that she built staircases to nowhere, doors into walls, hallways that turned back on themselves to confuse something that wasn't supposed to be there. And I want you to really sit with that idea for a moment. If you believe something was following you or watching you, waiting for you to stop moving, wouldn't you keep building too? Wouldn't you change rooms every night, seal off parts of the house, create confusion? The house starts to look less like a madness and more like defense. But then there's the money. Over nearly 40 years, Sarah Winchester reportedly spent the equivalent of more than $100 million. And when she died, the house was worth a fraction of that. It was damaged by earthquakes, structurally unsound, seen as a liability. That raises another question. If this was about logic, if this was about investment, why didn't she stop? Why keep pouring money into something that gave nothing back? Unless it was giving her something. All right, let's stay here for a moment because this is the part that really sticks with me. People always ask why the house is strange, why the staircases go nowhere, why doors open into walls, why the entire place feels like it was designed to disorient. If this is just grief, why not build something beautiful, something peaceful? Here's my thought. Grief is not clean. It is not organized. It doesn't move in straight lines. Grief doubles back on itself. It takes sudden turns, it leads you forward, and then drops you right back where you started. And that's exactly what the house does. When Sarah lost her daughter and then her husband, her life stopped making sense. The future she thought she was building disappeared, and suddenly she had all of the money in the world, but no direction to spend it toward. So what do you do when life becomes confusing? You build confusion. Not consciously, not deliberately, but because confusion feels familiar. Straight hallways lead somewhere. Finished rooms mean closure. Blueprints mean you know the end before you begin. And grief doesn't allow any of that. So instead, Sarah builds a place where nothing ends properly, where paths stop abruptly, where progress is an illusion. You think you're going up, and you hit a ceiling. That's grief. All right, let's widen the circle at the table a bit. Because even if grief was the foundation, that doesn't mean it was the only thing in the room. People ask why the house was confusing, why staircases lead to nowhere, why doors open into walls, and why nothing flows the way a normal home should. And grief explains a lot of that, but not all of it. Grief fractures logic. It makes time feel distorted. It turns straight paths into loops. But here's the thing. Some of the choices in that house don't just feel emotional. They feel reactive, as if something was being responded to. Not imagined, not symbolic, but present. If Sarah believed, even quietly, that spirits were real, then the architecture stops being abstract. It becomes tactical. Confusion isn't just a feeling anymore, it's a strategy. Staircases that go nowhere don't lead you anywhere. They lead something else into dead ends. Doors into walls aren't mistakes, they're traps. Paths that double back aren't design flaws, they're loops meant to hold attention. And here's where grief and spirits might overlap. Grief opens doors. It makes you vulnerable. It makes you listen harder. It makes you notice things you might have ignored before. Sounds at night, footsteps that don't belong to anyone, a sense that you're not alone when you should be. Whether those experiences were real or psychological almost doesn't matter. The response was real. Look at how the building never followed a single plan. If this was purely architectural experimentation, you'd expect patterns. Instead, the house shifts, corrects itself, seals off areas, moves away from itself. That's not how someone builds toward a vision. That's how someone builds away from something. And then there's the earthquake. After 1906, she boards up entire wings, leaves rooms unfinished, and walks away from spaces she once poured money into. If this was grief alone, why stop? Unless something changed, unless the message, whether from spirits or from the house itself, was received. And the witch's cap tower, the highest point, the most uncomfortable path, the room many describe as heavy. Why put a space like that above everything else? In spiritual traditions, higher spaces are for observation, for isolation, and for communion, not living. So maybe this wasn't a choice between grief or ghosts. Maybe grief was the doorway, and whatever came through that doorway shaped the house. Not every spirit has to be real for their influence to be powerful, and not every belief has to be documented to change behavior. The confusing architecture may have served two purposes at once: to give grief shape and to give spirits something to get lost in. And if you believed, truly believed, that stopping meant something could finally reach you, wouldn't you keep building too? Now let's talk about something that never feels accidental: the number 13. It shows up again and again in the Winchester house. 13 steps, 13 windows, 13 hooks, 13 drains. And before we dismiss that as coincidence, let me ask you something. How many times does something have to repeat before it stops being decoration and starts being instruction? In many belief systems, 13 isn't just unlucky. It's a threshold number, a number associated with death, with transition, with the space between one state and another. If Sarah believed she was dealing with spirits, then 13 wouldn't be something to avoid. It would be something to use. Think about it this way. If grief was the doorway and spirits were the pressure on the other side, then the house becomes a conversation, not with words, but with numbers. Patterns repeated not because they were aesthetic, but because they felt right, or worse, because they felt required. What if 13 wasn't Sarah's choice at all? What if it was the number that kept showing up, like a suggestion or a correction or a boundary? Add another step, make it 13, stop there. Build another window, make it 13, don't add one more. And here's where the architecture and the number collide. Confusing spaces slow movement. Numbers define it. Together, they don't just disorient, they regulate. If something was moving through the house, If something was following patterns we don't understand, then confusion would delay it, and 13 would contain it. Even psychologically, this matters. When someone believes a number holds power, repeating it becomes grounding, protective, almost ritualistic. A way of saying, this space is marked, this space is counted, you don't move past this point. Whether that power came from belief or from something whispering it into existence, the result is the same. And maybe that's why the house feels less like a home and more like a system, a series of checks, stops, loops, numbers that say here, but never beyond. So maybe the Winchester house wasn't built randomly. Maybe it was built by grief, shaped by belief, and refined by something unseen. Because if spirits were guiding her hand, they didn't guide her toward comfort. They guided her toward control. Grief doesn't speak in sentences, it speaks in patterns. It repeats, it counts, it marks time in strange ways. And maybe that's why this house was built the way that it was. Because if Sarah Winchester was grieving, she was searching for order in a world that had none. And if she believed spirits were near, then order wasn't just comfort, it was protection. The house confuses, the numbers define, paths twist and end abruptly. But 13 always returns, as if something needed limits, as if something needed to be told where to stop. Maybe the spirits weren't angry, maybe they were lost, and maybe the house wasn't meant to trap them, but to give them boundaries, a place where grief could move without escaping, a place where the dead could exist without crossing over. Because grief, like a spirit, doesn't want to be banished, it wants to be acknowledged, counted, given shape. And that's the unsettling possibility, that this wasn't a house built in fear, but a house built in negotiation, between loss and survival, between belief and reason, between the living and whatever lingers just beyond them. So maybe Sarah Winchester didn't build to escape the dead. Maybe she built so no one, not the spirits, not the memories, not even herself, could ever truly leave. And if that's true, then the house is still doing exactly what it was built to do. So I leave you with one final question before we step away from the table. If the dead were truly guiding her hand, not in whispers, but in patterns, shadows, and numbers, then when Sarah Winchester finally stopped building, what walked into the house and what stayed behind? Until next time, here at Into the Unknown, whatever you're searching for, the answers may be waiting in the dark.